Wait.
As Kate said,
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
Wait for Sean to say it.
Way
to go, Kate.
Okay, thank you, Sean and Kate. As Kate said, I'm Karen Anton. I'm a member of the Reston Association Elections Committee, and I'm happy to be your moderator this morning. This spring, the citizens of Reston will elect 3 Reston Association Board members. 1 from the Hunters Woods Dogwood District, 1 at-large director who will serve a 1-year term, and 1 at-large director who will serve a term of 3 years. RA board members determine the association's goals and policies, making a significant and lasting contribution to the community. We have 1 member running for the Hunters Woods Dogwood District seat, Lucinda Shannon. 2 members are running for the 1-year term at-large seat, Rachel Muir and Jerry Lloyd. 5 members are vying for the 3-year term at-large seat, Michael Mackert, Jeff Thomas, Andy Siegel, Mason. You were provided with a form to pose a written question to the candidates. Members of the Elections Committee and staff will be collecting questions throughout the morning from the audience, and questions will be randomly selected to pose to the candidates. We're going to start with the candidates' opening remarks. Each candidate will have 1 minute to make an opening remark, and the candidates will speak in the following order. And as a reminder to the candidates, we will reverse that order with each subsequent question. So the order that we are going to begin with for the opening remarks is the order in which you are all seated. Lucinda Shannon, Mike Mackert, Jeff Thomas, Andy Siegel, Mason Miller, Colin Mills, Rachel Muir, and Jerry Beloy. And once each candidate has made his or her opening remark, the forum discussion will begin. We'll have an Elections Committee warm-up question. We will have questions from the audience, both live and online, and then there will be closing remarks for each candidate. So that's how we're going to proceed. So let us proceed now with the candidates' opening remarks. Lucinda.
Thanks, Karen. And thanks, everybody, for coming out today and engaging in this public forum. I used to be in the audience at these events, and you just better watch out, because if you come to enough of them, you'll end up on the table. A little bit about me. I've worked for Easter Seal's Office of Public Affairs for 10 years. I work on livability, transportation, aging, and disability policy. I collaborate with human service agencies as well as local, state, federal, and government agencies to improve transportation and livability across the nation. Every day I work with communities like Reston to develop coalitions to improve services for low-income, aging, and diverse communities. My focus is on transportation, but it's related to land use and livability. I'm the candidate for the Hunters Woods Dogwood District. My colleagues Rachel Muir and Colin Mills and I share a common vision for a resilient Reston. By voting for us, you will bring new skills to the board.
Thank you, Lucinda. Mike.
Good morning. Thank you for coming out today. Your presence here shows you care, and that's why I'm here, is because I care. I care about our parks. I care about our green spaces. I care about our recreational facilities, our neighborhoods. I care about our residents. I care about Reston. I'm a Restonian just like you are. And if you're like me, our Reston way of life is precious. But now that 800-pound gorilla in the room, development, is threatening that way of life. But it doesn't have to be that way. But in order to keep things in balance, remember Reston's slogan, live, work, play. We need to be vigilant as citizens and as an association board that we are part of the discussion. Not at the kids' table, but at the adults' table when the decisions are made, not after the fact. And I'm happy to say that our board is taking steps right now to make that happen. It takes persistence and creativity to keep us relevant in the process. I believe I have the skills and attributes to strengthen the board and ensure we are relevant in any discussion on the use of the Reston lands.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff?
Hi, good morning. My name is Jeff Thomas, and I'm running for one of the at-large positions. I first want to say thank you for coming out and joining us at this forum this morning. This is a great opportunity for us to answer questions that you have and questions that are proposed from the Elections Committee. I also want to thank all the members up here at the table, all the candidates, the volunteers who are offering to step up and help lead our community. I think that's fantastic. I've had a wonderful time getting to know them a little better and engaging. It's been a fantastic experience. So the reason I'm running is I'm a 43-year resident of Reston. So I've seen some things. I kind of know what's going on in the community. I've raised my kids here. Of course, I was raised here. I've raised my kids, and I plan to retire here. So I have a little bit invested in the future of Reston. I think I was encouraged to run for the board from a number of members in the community. They thought that my experience in the community involvement with the RA, on the RA covenant, not the covenants committee, I'm sorry, on the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee and my volunteer activities with Reston Little League and other youth sports organizations would really bring a good perspective to the RA board. There's a lot of challenges that we're going to be facing over the next few years, and I hope to be a strong advocate and represent Reston as we face those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy?
Thank you. It has been a privilege to serve on the RA board. I believe my experience as a business leader in the for-profit sector and MBA from the University of Chicago and the knowledge and relationships built through local volunteer activities have created a powerful foundation with which to address the issues facing our community. Recent experiences that strengthen my qualifications include a 3-year membership on the RA Fiscal Committee, service on the RA Reston Master Plan Task Force, 2 years as a board VP, hosting of the Reston Today Community News Program, and current participation in the Leadership Fairfax Program. Going forward, while the challenges we face certainly will be different from those of the past, I believe our founding principles should continue to be the measure by which we judge our opportunities and set our policies. With these principles in mind, I would continue to focus the board and staff on developing, optimizing, and allocating financial resources to sustain and enhance the association's physical infrastructure, establishing relationships and procedures that enhance the association's influence on the redevelopment activities of our community, and increasing RA's engagement with the overall community to accurately understand and represent the interests of all components that make up Reston. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Mason?
Good morning. Thank you for coming out. My name is Mason Miller. I moved to Reston in 1971 with my parents. We initially lived on Inlet Cluster, and I spent a lot of time in the woods in between Inlet and Lake Ann. Used to buy Matchbox cars at Larry's Pharmacy. I've since then lived behind Tall Oaks. I've lived in South Lakes, Hunters Woods. I've been everywhere in Reston, except I will say North Point. I haven't been there yet. I plan to retire here. I have 2 kids, one in college, one graduating from South Lakes, where I went to high school. I think that I've got a lot in common with most of you who are here today. I think I'll bring a voice of reason to the board. I also think that we can work moving forward with the developers who are going to be adding thousands and thousands of residents to Reston to make sure that that development is done in a good way that benefits us and that we can benefit them and have one community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. Colin?
Thank you. Good morning, and I'm glad that we finally have a day where it's not snowing. I'm a lifelong Restonian. I was born here, and I grew up walking our trails and swimming in our pools like Mason and Jeff. For the past 8 years, I've served with the Reston Citizens Association, including the last 2.5 years as president. I also served for 5 years on the RCC board, and I was Bob Simon's alternate on the Master Plan Task Force. Reston is facing an important moment in its history. The decisions that we make now will affect our community for generations. About land use planning, recreational facilities, natural spaces. I believe that my knowledge of Reston's history and values and my civic experience are what Reston needs right now. I will work to help RA and our members have a say in Reston's redevelopment, enhance Reston's open space, and ensure that RA keeps you informed and listens to what you have to say. Reston's most valuable resource is its citizens. Vote for me and my friends Rachel Muir and Lucinda Shannon, and we'll work hard on behalf of all members of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Rachel?
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see you all this morning. An advantage I have is, of course, is that Lucinda and Colin have already spoken as a team. We're working together, and when you hear them, you get an opportunity to hear some of my views and my concerns. I believe Reston is based, and our success is based on a three-legged stool: our social, our economic, and our environmental values. My promise to you as a candidate is that those fundamental values will be maintained and enhanced as Reston grows and changes. This is absolutely fundamental and an expectation not only for the residents who live here now in Reston, but we want to assure that new people who come to Reston will have the same resources, will have the same opportunities that we have, including our children. I look forward to the pleasure of being able to serve you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And Jerry.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Let me tell you why I'm running. First, for the last 4 years, I've served on the task force, not only planning an exciting vision for Reston's future, but also how to mitigate the impacts of Reston's future growth and development on our community and on the critical challenges that RA will face. Protecting our community's values, our natural resources, and sense of community will require strong and informed leadership. My background and experience as a result-oriented community leader, as a business, government, and military leader arm me well to meet those challenges. Second, Reston's the greatest community in which I've ever lived. Serving this community fulfills my desire to continue to give back to it for the joy that it brings to me and my family each and every day. Third, I know firsthand the incredible staff that serves the association, their professionalism and dedication. As a board member, it would be an honor to challenge them with an exciting future organizational vision and to help the RA board make that vision a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, candidates. Next, we have a warm-up question from the Elections Committee. And I know your agenda says 2 minutes to respond. It's actually 3 minutes. Last month, during its annual Strategic Priorities meeting, the RA Board of Directors identified the following objectives from the Association's 2012-2016 Strategic Plan as their areas of primary focus for the next 12 months. Change and Opportunity, Objective 3. Establish procedures that will ensure Reston Association's interests are considered in redevelopment and revitalization of our community. Community Leadership and Engagement, Objective 1. Regularly engage the diverse elements of the community on issues and opportunities that impact Reston. Technology, Objective 2. Continuously use integrated technologies to improve service delivery, including more efficient and timely communication and faster financial transactions. If elected to the Board of Directors, what actions do you believe the association needs to undertake in the next 12 months in an effort to achieve the related priority objectives just mentioned? And this time we're going to start with Jerry Beloy.
The new comp plan adds 46,000 new residents and 37 million square feet of future residential and commercial development within the Reston corridor. That equates to about 37 23-story Accenture buildings of new development with its attendant impervious surfaces, and we haven't even begun planning the future development and growth of the Reston Village Centers. Those realities will have significant impacts upon Reston's existing natural areas, lakes, watershed, public and recreational facilities. RA is one, developing a value proposition that will excite developers to want to be a part of RA, to assimilate them as future stakeholders and as contributors to the maintenance of our natural resources and the build of public amenities. Two, working with our district supervisor in Fairfax County to establish through the proper process ways to make that happen. And three, working to develop a joint DRB and Reston P&Z design review process of future development to ensure that it adheres to our expectations of high standards of design and maintenance. These efforts are critical to RA's future and must be continued as priorities for the association. Second item, 35% of the Hunter Mill district is non-white, 17% Asian, 10% Hispanic, and 8% African American. 23% are over 55, and that'll grow to 36% by 2030. Let me mention a few names. Carrie Wilson from Cornerstone, Ellen Graves, the Vice President of the Southgate Community Center, and someone who's been involved in the Multicultural Festival and MLK Day for years. Lila Gordon from RCC, Amanda Anderi, current RA board member, Terry Day, the principal of Dogwood Elementary, Mrs. Cheng from Chu Chi, and Juan Pacheco from Barrios Unidos. I don't pretend to know how best to reach out and serve our community's diverse members, but they do. RA ought to be reaching out to them and joining them to understand how best to do that. To me, that's the best way to move forward with such an initiative. You can go to Amada's website, plug in your address, where and when you want to go, either by bus or rail, and find out how to do that. The county and RA are encouraging people who live within a half-mile of the station not to drive, but to walk or bike to the station. Why not be able to go to RA's website, plug in where you live, and get a depiction either by walking or biking of the best way to get to the Wheelie Transit Station area, or in the future, to either the town center or the Herman Monroe station. That exercise might also tell RA that for some, it isn't as easy as they think it is to get to the station and what trails or bike paths should get priority for completion. Finally, after making a purchase or seeking technical assistance from a company, how many here have received a survey to find out how well they did? You ever get one from RA? Why not? You're not going to know how to improve unless you're measuring how well you're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Rachel?
The Reston Association has been conducting meetings to look at these three elements, this idea of change and opportunity, community leadership and engagement, and technology. And I believe they made some first good steps. I believe in regards to change and opportunity, and something that we have emphasized in our campaign, are three major issues: working in collaboration with Fairfax County and the other entities that we need to engage on the master plan to be assured that we are an active and influential part of that process. If that does not occur, then we will have a plan imposed upon us. So to engage in the master planning process is number one. Two, the biggest challenge and what the most impact we are going to see in Reston is going to be on transportation. Having a working and effective transportation plan is the second and most key element in terms of change and opportunity. Number three is that as this community develops, what we are discovering is that the expectations for new growth are not the same expectations for protection of natural resources that we have in Reston as a whole. We have to hold the line in terms of making sure that the open spaces that we have are maintained, and that those open spaces throughout the community make the grade that we have always expected in Reston. The interesting point is that the more people you have, the greater demand you put on those natural resources. That makes those natural resources and those open spaces all the more important, and it's all the more important that we protect them and we enhance them and we restore them. In regards to community leadership and engagement, I think we need to engage in a diverse community, and something that I don't think is always fully addressed is the fact that part of that diversity are our seniors and our young people. Seniors and young people require special services. Whatever RA can do to meet those needs, and we have a growing senior population, we must do so. One simple but key element we can do is make the information that we produce as a community available in multiple languages. Our campaign literature that we produce is both in English and Spanish. That's a small first step, but that's something that we propose to do. In regards to technology, there are some steps. I think the most important one is for us to modernize, particularly in regards to the Design Review Board, the process by which information is transferred to make them most effective. Finally, there's one issue that's not addressed in here, which I think is critical. We're facing the snowstorm coming up again Monday. We have to work together to have plans to make sure that our children can get to school safely in the events, in the snow events that we've experienced in this winter. All it takes is cooperation. Not a lot of work on any of the entities that are responsible, but collaboration, and that's something that I think the RA board can take a leadership role in. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Colin?
All right. Well, first off, let me state that I think that the board has identified the right strategic priorities. So how are we going to deal with them? Change and opportunity. Land use and redevelopment has been a big focus for us at RCA over the last few years. Change and growth is coming to Reston, and RA has a key role in managing the impact, integrating the new development into the community, maintaining our architectural and design standards, making sure that our residents have the recreational facilities we need, and as Rachel said very eloquently, protecting our open spaces and natural resources. We must have a seat at the table when redevelopment comes through. This ensures that our citizens are represented and that we get our fair share of proffers to help provide amenities for our community. We should be among the first to know about what's coming to our community, not the last. I also strongly support the recent moves RA has made to involve the advisory committees more in considering redevelopment proposals as they come through. And we also need to think about phase 2 of the master plan. That's the rest of Reston outside of the station areas. As a major stakeholder, RA needs to have a lead role in phase 2. We should be working with the county to develop a citizen-driven process that focuses on reimagining our village centers as Bob Simon envisioned them, built around plazas, while protecting our existing residential neighborhoods. Now, community leadership. I think RA should hold more community forums. Take last month's forum on the Silver Line, or the joint forum that RA, RCA, and ARCH held about the master plan last fall. These forums were timely, informative, and useful to our members. Both events had great turnout. Clearly, our members appreciated what we were doing. We should hold these forums at least once a quarter, as events warrant. We also need to listen to the members as well as speaking to them. I'd like to see more listening events where members can weigh in on the issues that concern them and provide their opinions. And we also need to meet the members where they are, getting into the neighborhoods and having a greater presence at local events. We also need to try to catch people who never go to meetings, making better use of online and social media. Maybe RA could hold an online summit where RA staffers and leaders are available for questions, like the Ask Me Anything sessions they have on Reddit. People are overloaded with information from every direction, and we need to be creative to break through the clutter and reach our members. Technology. I strongly support the idea of moving away from paper and making better use of computers. The election process is a great example of how technology can help. If we can move our voting online, we save time, money, and effort. I think we can apply these same principles to covenants administration, DRB, like Rachel said, collection of assessment of fees, and more. I would raise a couple caveats, though. Information security needs to be a priority. We've seen how vulnerable online records can be. We must ensure that our members' information, especially identifying and financial information, is protected. And we also need to look out for the less fortunate members of our community. Not everybody has a computer. Not everyone can afford one. And we need to make sure that everyone will still have access to RA's programs and resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Mason?
Well, you know, it's hard to disagree with anything I've heard so far. I think everybody here shares sort of the same goals. We love Reston and we want to see it thrive. The change that is coming, and it is coming, is going to need to be managed by the residents who are already here. Reston Association has 60-some thousand residents that it represents. Now, we represent them as households. We don't have one vote for every person. But I do think that we need to work to manage this change by having Reston be our lobbyist. You know, we've got, if you look at our supervisor's district, without Reston, that supervisor doesn't have 100 mil. You know, we need to work hard to make sure that we get represented well, because the truth is, when it comes to the development that's coming down the road, it isn't going to be Reston Association that gets to decide. It's going to be the Fairfax County Planning Board, and it's going to be the Board of Supervisors. I think that it's important that we work hard with them to make sure that there are proffers put in place as we redevelop this commercial corridor, this strip that we've got along Sunset Hills and Sunrise Valley, to make sure that our interests are represented, and that when we're all done, that we have got one Reston that we all still want to live in. Let's make sure that we get where we want to be, which isn't that far from where we are. It's just going to look a little different. As far as technology, I'm a web developer. I build web software, so I can look at any website and pick it apart. But I would say the RA site could use some work. There probably ought to be a more engaged portal. You know, when I log in, maybe it's not just about paying my bill. You know, maybe it's about forums that we've got so that you could have neighborhood discussions, things like that. That would bring the community in. Maybe there are tools that we offer to cluster associations for them to help manage dialogue within their own clusters. The more that we can bring people together, the more dialogue we'll have, and the more ability Reston Association will have to reach out to those members. If they're coming in for more local issues in their own neighborhoods, they'll be exposed to what's being discussed here at Reston Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. Andy?
Thank you. I was on the board 3 years ago when we came up with that last 5-year strategic plan, and we did it thoughtfully, and those high-level strategic objectives, strategic areas, I think are important for us to focus on. And in terms of the first one, change and opportunity, there is a lot of redevelopment, on the horizon. Relationships and a seat at the table are a key component of influencing those development projects. At a high level, our membership on the Reston Master Plan Task Force Phase 1, we made a lot of progress setting some foundations. That's foundation of a one Reston concept. The foundation of that our founding principles should be the measure by which new developments look at and how we put them in there. Environmental stewardship, commitment to the arts, accessibility, planning and design excellence, superior recreational amenities, housing opportunities, diverse housing opportunities. Those served us 50 years ago, they're serving us now, and we need to keep those as the foundation by which we measure everything going forward. The big thing is, and the objective that I'd like to talk about is the implementation is key. So now, how do we get since that foundation set, how do we make that happen? And I think Kate and the staff right now, one of these strategic objectives we're working on is how do we put a framework around so that our advisory committees, the design review board, have influence on these projects early, whether they're in our PRC, our planned residential community, or in the non-PRC, so like in the corridor. How do we get influence early, and how do we make sure that developers are thinking about those things early, and how does the board make sure we're getting all of the important data points early to help make policy? And we've got a great framework, and that's the strategic objective I'd like to keep focusing on right now in Change and Opportunity, is to make that process solid, finalize it, and get it working and implemented well. Community leadership and engagement. Last year, we sponsored 2 community-wide surveys, one that focused on apartments and one that was more of a community-wide survey. Both of those surveys, we got download of data that came from them, lots of great information in them. The strategic objective I'd like the staff and the board to focus on is let's glean and garner the right information from those. Let's deep dive into those, find 2 or 3 things that make sense that came out from the gems that people input into them, our members, our neighbors put into them, and get those acted on. So let's take that to the next level and work on it. Finally, technology objective, same thing. Last year we sponsored a technology task force, ad hoc, for several of our members to come together to help us set a strategic vision for technology for the association. We need to take that study and then have the board and the staff come up with 2 or 3 implementable actions that we can take in the near term that takes us towards that objective, whether that's cloud, whether that's digitizing our paper records, but that's the next step. Implementable objectives from the study we've already done and move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Jeff?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good discussion from my fellow candidates on this. And this first issue of change and opportunity is really the most important one in my mind, because the amount of change that our community is going to face over the next 20 years is just unbelievable. Reston's going to look a lot different. I think key for us on the RA board is to be sure, although it may look different, it still feels like Reston. We need to be preserving the core values that make Reston. That's preserving our open spaces, being sure we have outstanding recreational amenities and facilities for our kids, for our adults, for our growing, diverse, active adult community. So those are the core values that we really need to be focusing on as we're facing these changes. I think moving forward, the most important thing to help us achieve that goal is going to be focusing on process. To a large extent, with the master planning effort, a lot of the big decisions have already been made. But what we need to do as part of Reston is we need to focus on developing a process by which we engage with the county staff to ensure that Reston county staff, as well as our elected officials, to be sure that they know what our will and our desires are, our aspirations as a community are. And I think we can do this by three stool prongs, if you like. One is, build that relationship with the county representatives. The second, we need to be developing a guidebook for developers that are going to be coming into our community. And I think the RA staff are already started on this type of initiative. But having that early type of communication with the developer community is going to be so important to be sure that they understand where Reston comes from and what we want to be as a community. By the time a zoning application comes to the RA board to our volunteer committees, it's way too late. The big decisions have already been made. The developers have already made their investments. We need to be sure that we're making those engagements very early in the development process. As the developers are putting pen to paper, they need to understand, and Reston needs to have a clear voice of what our desires and aspirations are as they're joining our community. And the third thing is we need to be sure that we're managing our internal staff resources appropriately. With all the changes that are coming on, to a large extent, I think the roles and responsibilities of our staff are going to grow and get more complex. So we need to be sure that they're getting the training and have the capabilities and resources that they need to help the board represent our community's interests. With regard to community leadership and engagement, we need to have more two-way conversations in Reston. A lot of times the focus is on websites and pushing out information. We need to be sure that the RA board is getting out and listening to the community, creating one-on-one forums like this, but that are centered around our strategic goals, not just hot button issues that percolate up from time to time. The third area is in technology. We need to be sure that we're making good, sound investments. I'm not going to speak to specific projects that I might want to implement, but we need to be sure we're making good investments in technology, being sure we have a process by which we're evaluating, be sure that we're getting the return on investment that we want from IT projects. Because ultimately, when we spend money on one project, we're not spending it on something else. So we need to have a good process by which we're evaluating how the RA makes investments in IT as well as other areas. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike.
Okay, well, I hate to do this, but I'm going to be the seventh person to say some of the same things have been said already about engaging the people at the initial planning stages, and that being our elected officials, Fairfax County, what have you. We need to be part of the discussion early on. Obviously, again, everybody agrees on that, so I won't belabor the point, but that's I believe in that strongly too. Now, if I'd have been first, then you would all have to be picking up the scraps at the end. But anyway, again, we need to gain access to any relevant focus groups, committees that we might not already be part of, and just make sure our voice is heard throughout that process. So I'm going to spend a little more time on the other areas. As far as community engagement and leadership, okay, I want to give you a little example. I live on Lake Audubon. Last year, there was a big brouhaha when the stand-up paddle boards were going to be rented out. And it's just like the sky is falling scenario when you get a little bit of information without the total picture, the whole story. It becomes a major event. And the worst case scenarios are imagined. Like there's going to be spotlights out on Lake Audubon, and we're going to be doing this, basically all waking hours, and it's going to interfere with, the recreational use of the residents. That could have been avoided, okay? And that's engaging the community with better communications. And perhaps, dovetailing a little bit on the technology side there, is if you have, updated list of emails or whatever, let those people know in the affected communities that this is what's going on. Or we're discussing this at this month's RA meeting. Why don't you come have a voice in it? And, you know, it's probably not as bad as you think. And it turned out it wasn't, and I know it's coming up again. So if you're not sending something out, you ought to for this one, because it may happen again, because the alarmists will be out. Okay, other groups that may be, I mean, as well as that, but any issue that affects specific groups, clusters, or parts of our community need to be engaged, such as all those distinguished people that Jerry referred to earlier. Now, technology. I just want to say a few things about it. I know RA is doing some redesign. And what also was mentioned about the, you know, your experience in checking things out. Maybe we should go to something like a Metro card that has a smart chip in it that we can just add, you know, an amount to it through a bank account rather than sending out pool passes every year, and then you would have those passes. I don't know, but something that would be a little more, you know, in keeping with 2014. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Lucinda?
Thanks. Gosh, I could just say what they said. But you know tremendous growth is coming, and we can grow while preserving our open space and founding principles. I know this. I'm a policy nerd. I have a master's degree in policy, and I spend way too much time studying how communities grow and develop. Land use and economic development decisions have social impacts and transportation impacts. Reston's unique because we're a planned community. We have more trees and open space, and believe it or not, better traffic than most of the areas in this area. We need to keep this. And I see the effects of good and bad land use every day in my profession, and I know how to help communities build people-first transportation networks that work within their landscape. With regard to the second priority, community leadership and engagement, my nonprofit and government experience make me a little different from some of the other candidates, and I prioritize the human impact as well as the bottom line. More diverse views in a group bring more knowledge to the group and help us make better decisions. One of the things that I love about living in Reston is the diversity. I used to live in the Dogwood District, and now I live in the Hunters Woods District. The Dogwood District has the highest concentration of Latino families in Reston. We need to engage and support this community. In the U.S. today, diversity is more about economics and generations. And the population in Reston is aging, and many will be living on a fixed income. We need to keep this a place that all people can live and enjoy. I spent 2 summers volunteering on the Pine Ridge Reservation supporting traditional Native American ceremonies. Professionally, I work on projects to help senior transportation and improve senior transportation. And locally, I'm a member of Reston for a lifetime. I will work to represent and engage the underserved groups in Reston and ensure that this is a place that supports all members of our community. And my answer for the third priority, technology, the current board has a vast wealth of technology and corporate business experience. I support their efforts to use technology to improve services and efficiency for our members. I will add more diversity to the board by contributing my government and nonprofit experience to the mix. I want to ensure that we value Reston's assets using standards that will bring prosperity to Reston for years to come. We can use technology to develop long-term plans, model growth patterns, and make choices based on the outcomes. We can also use technology to engage more members of our community. Rachel Collin and I made an effort to translate some of our campaign materials into Spanish. The association can use technology to reach out and communicate with all the members of its community more effectively. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucinda. Thanks to all your candidates. Okay, we're going to move on to audience questions. We had some questions submitted by our live audience on the web, as well as from many of you. There were some great questions. I need to whittle it down to 4. There are some common themes, so I'm going to try to combine and put forth the questions as best I can, and hopefully, if you were one who posed the question, you will approve of what I'm doing rather than read so many. We had several questions on a subject that's near and dear to my heart, which is indoor recreational facilities. So I would like to ask the candidates what your position is on an indoor recreational facility with provisions for indoor swimming and tennis. One of the questioners, I believe just one of them, specifically asked about Barron Cameron Park. So if you care to address that issue, feel free to do so. Jerry.
Let me tell you, right now, Reston has very precious little open space. We need to be very aware about losing more. Secondly, the weakest thing that I heard during our Reston master plan process is where we're going to put new schools. With 46,000 new Reston residents, we're going to need 3 new schools here in Reston. The school board, a couple of years ago, decided that they'd give that Barron Cameron land to the Park Authority. Maybe that's the right thing to do, maybe it's not, but one of the suggestions they had was, well, you know, today a lot of people are putting schools in office buildings. I've got a 1-year-old grandson. That might be the answer for other communities, but I don't think it's the answer for this community. And before we start making decisions about where we're going to use land and how we're going to use it, we better know if we need those lands to support our kids. Because to me, educating my 1-year-old grandson is more important than an indoor basketball court or an indoor squash court. We've got to answer those questions. We've got to answer them. Now, on the 27th, there's a forum about Barron Cameron Park. I can tell you so far, the Reston Association responses have been pretty negative about the indoor rec center. I want you to go to that forum. I want you to decide whether you think that's the most important thing in our community. We have, you know, a number of years ago, we had a Reston Reston Metro Rail Access Group that said we need $105 million
Excuse me,
of
Jerry,
infrastructure.
you
I'm
need to
sorry, I
wrap
didn't know
up.
whether there was a
Sorry.
time limit. Okay, I'll wrap up.
And I apologize for
Have it the
not
red
making
card?
that clear.
I'm sorry, I didn't know there was
Yeah.
a time limit here for Reston. If we're going to look at spending $100 million for an indoor rec center,
We need to.
in
move
order
on
to
here.
solve our traffic problem, we better be looking at other priorities as well. But go to that forum, and I'll listen to what you say about the indoor rec center. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry
No,
about the
that's all right. I was remiss in not reminding you that this is a 90-second response.
Okay.
You should have brought the baseball
Well, I
bat.
made it then.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Okay, Rachel.
Thank you. I think Jerry brings up a good point. Our open space is precious. If we're going to consider indoor recreational opportunities, I think probably the first place to look would be at redevelopment of those areas that already perhaps are built, but through, they may be aged, or they may be, a better use may be to have a multiple use recreational facility in one of those locations with no net loss, as I have emphasized, no net loss of the open space and the natural resource values that we have here in Reston. I'm an active member in the Reston Master Swimming. I belong to Reston Runners. I'm very familiar with the athletic community here and also with the youth athletic activities. I know there's a real need there. However, making good choices about where that location would be and also putting it in the perspective of priorities within the community is an important decision to make. So like Jerry, I urge you to attend that session on the 27th, but I also want you to consider, whenever possible, keep our open spaces, keep our natural places, and if we're going to put in a new indoor facility, to the degree we can, try to use spaces that are already occupied for other uses than open space. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Colin?
Well, I think we have to remember that we're dealing with limited resources here, not just natural open spaces, which is also limited, but also financial resources. Indoor recreation center would cost a lot of money, maybe $100 million. And any facility that we build should serve the largest possible cross-section of residents. So if we are going to build something, I think we need to think very carefully about what's going to go into that facility. Supporters of indoor swimming and indoor tennis have been very vocal, but we need to know how widespread that demand is. Maybe in the next RA community survey, we should take a look at what people's indoor recreation priorities are, or overall recreation priorities are, to understand how widespread the demand is for this in the community before we make a significant investment like that. Right now, RCC is the one that's looking primarily at an indoor recreation facility. There was talk a few years ago of RCC and RA partnering on a recreation facility at Browns Chapel. That didn't go through. And I do think we need to look at partnerships, not just within the community, but also with the county, with user groups, with other organizations, if we are going to build something, because Reston built its own community center 30 years ago, 35 years ago. And we are the only district, magisterial district in Fairfax County that does not have a county-funded recreation facility. So I do not think we should be expected to pick up the tab for this one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, talking about an indoor swimming facility, indoor recreation facilities in Reston, I mean, Reston Association doesn't own an indoor pool. And if people don't like the choice of Barron Cameron Park, for the county to do this, or the Reston Community Center District, well, then they need to talk to the RCC board and to the county. If we're talking about $105 million for a pool, for an indoor recreational center, Reston's annual budget is $16 million a year. I don't think Reston has the resources to do that by ourselves. But if it's a community need and we do want to build it, where in Reston do you want to do it besides Barron Cameron Park? That was zoned to be a high school. We've actually benefited by not having the kind of heavy, intense use that was originally planned when Reston was envisioned for that location. I think if we ended up with the RCC building an indoor recreational center that would benefit our kids, would also benefit new people coming to the community and those who are here, I don't have a huge problem with that. I would support keeping the dog park, though. I'd move it into the interior. I think that's not a rotten plan.
Thank you, Mason. Andy?
Thank you. Do I think that Reston could use another Olympic-sized indoor pool and an indoor tennis courts? Yes. I think that would be a great amenity for our community. Obviously, now the devil's in the details about how that happens, right? So in terms of Barron Cameron Park, if you said to me, it's either Barron Cameron Park or nothing, I'd say probably belongs to Barron Cameron Park then, because we probably need something like that. Would I rather see something like that in the more centrally located in our community so people could do more multimodal transportation to get there? You better believe it. Do I think I'd like to see some kind of proffers and public-private partnership to happen in that section of our community? You better believe it. Those are the things that I think are key. So again, there's some difficult choices ahead of us. I think we need to be thoughtful. Do I want to rush into something, as was said earlier? No. Do I think it makes sense to have something? Yes. In terms of natural areas, my default position is that I would like to keep natural areas. I would like to, if there's going to be redevelop on some asphalt or redevelop on an existing building. That's my default position. Now, can you knock me off that position by informing me on other founding principles that come in conflict with that, whether economic or social? Yep, we need to talk and have a full discussion on all the data points so we make an informed decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Jeff?
This is an important topic for it, because it's not just about a particular facility, here or there. It really gets to our engagement in our partners that that Reston needs to engage with. Fairfax County, RCC in this case, the RA board, even getting down to dealing with the public schools. Because the change that's coming to our community, we're going to have 20,000 new residents, new residencies, that's not people, that's residencies in Reston. And for us to sit back and think that we're going to be able to not add to our recreational facilities over the next 10, 15 years, I don't think that's realistic. I think we're going to need to make investments in community facilities. My default position, similar, is where we have open space and parkland, we need to preserve that because we can never, ever get that back. Okay? That being said, I think there are opportunities for us to find alternatives through proffers with the developers, being creative about where we locate these facilities that can really make a difference for us. Because listen, as a value proposition, having recreational facilities is good for me as a homeowner. They're good for my property values. When people are coming to buy our 5-bedroom homes that a lot of us live in, that we bought 20, 30, 40 years ago, they're coming in with families, with kids. So we need to be sure we're thinking about a good return on investment. And I think that building community facilities like that, if they're thoughtfully done, is a value-added proposition for Reston residents. And over the long term, is going to be a good deal.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike.
Okay, I'm as active as anybody. Well, not everybody, but I'm pretty active. So, I like my facilities too. Would I like, an indoor golf range? Sure. A driving range where I could hit off a second deck that's indoor? Yeah. We all want something. We all have our little pet things, but is it reasonable and is it practical? And is it fiscally responsible to do it? And that's what it comes down to. If you want this, are you willing to pay? We just had a hike in our assessments. Are you willing to pay another $100 a year? What are you willing to pay? So, that's the number one thing. How's it going to be funded? And it's been mentioned before. Maybe the developer in some of these new corridors, that's part of the proffer, and you put up X amount of money for this facility, or you get existing businesses maybe want to sponsor facilities so that they can have sort of a naming rights. I don't know what the legalities is on that in Reston. But going forward, I would say that, yes, there's plenty of opportunities to do that, but like my colleagues, I don't want to use natural spaces, but maybe we use something like the Tall Oaks Shopping Center, which is basically vacant. Maybe you could put an indoor tennis facility there. I don't know. But, look at opportunities like that instead of seeing basically a ghost town. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Lucinda.
Here I am at the end of the line again. I really liked what Rachel said about using an already developed area and not losing any more open space, and making good choices about location, because we really want to consider the traffic implications as well. And what Colin said about the limited resources, I think it's important for us to recognize I pay county taxes, and I pay Reston Community Center special fee taxes, and I pay Reston Association dues. And the Reston Association provides a lot of recreational facilities that I really enjoy. But I think that we need to look at the county and the RCC to step up and do their part as well. As far as Barron Cameron Park goes, it's not in my district. And I really don't want to see any more open space built on. So I think it should be something that's, more towards the developed areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucinda. Well, that question has provided me with a natural segue into what I'm going to ask you to address next. Some of you have already touched on this in your response to the indoor facilities question. We've had some questions, several questions, in fact, about concerns about our natural areas, specifically the tree canopy ratios and the land swap. So what I would like to ask you all is, if elected to the board, how would you go about balancing the interests of environmental protection and community development? And Lucinda, we'll start with you.
Thanks. Um, I think that, well, I lived in San Francisco, and it's really beautiful there. And they have a lot of open space as well as a lot of development. And I think that, and I said to my friend, like, why? Why is this so nice here? And she said, it's the zoning. It's zoned so that you have to build in small little areas, and then you've preserved your open space. So they've built up, and that land is valued more highly than anything else. If you have strong principles, clear planning, and good zoning, you can develop and keep your open space. I've seen many examples of it across the country. As far as the Lake Ann land swap, we need to explore all the alternatives and find one that would support both the needs of the developer and the community. I think that the information that was available to the board was inadequate to make an informed decision at that point. And I also think that RA land should not be turned over to developers and cleared of trees or other vegetation without a clearly demonstrating an overwhelming need. And with a fair return to Reston. I think that as far as the land swap at Lake Ann was concerned, those considerations were not met.
Thank you. Mike.
Okay, this is the existential question, I guess, for development, right? How do we keep what we have, and how do we let development go forward? Okay, well, for one thing, we do have covenants in place as part of the Reston deed, and going forward is how much are they supposed to preserve with any development. Make sure that's enforced. We just had something recently that I read about that's a little disturbing. Piece of property, the church was building out their parking lot at was it Reston Parkway and Barron Cameron, and the design review board went ahead and approved basically almost a clear cut of that parking lot, and without any consultation. Not that they're obligated to talk to the RA about it, but without really, I don't think, considering the overall impact to how the community would react to that as well. So, I mean, things like that, we need internally to enforce our own, what we're preaching, We got to practice what we preach, and I don't think that was done there. So I think there's an opportunity there.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff.
I think this issue gets back to the change issue that's coming our way. The new development that's coming in, a lot of the changes that are going to be a lot of the changes that we're going to see are going to be driven by the zoning process now, by individual development plans coming in and the process by which they get approved. And through that process is really going to determine how much land we're going to lose, how many trees we're going to lose. So getting back to that thing I talked about earlier, where we need to be sure that we're engaging Fairfax County staff and the developers way early in the process so that we're able to clearly communicate our values and work with the developers so that they can do and get what they need out of the development, but also they can do it respectful of what RA values. And part of what RA values is open space and trees and being sure we have good canopy. The other part of that, and I think even more importantly, is when we're looking to phase 2 of the master plan rewrite, we're going to be looking at the village centers. That's where I think the greatest potential impact to everybody in Reston is really going to be felt. And we're going to have to really leverage our design review board to kind of look out for our interests, but also be sure that the RA board is being forceful in representing the interests of Reston, again, to the developers and with the county staff, because that's where it all comes down to, is how Reston Association is going to be managing its relationships with our partners in the community, because we don't do anything in a vacuum. We don't want to be in a position where things are being done to us. We want to be a part of things that are being done in our community.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy.
Thank you. I'll repeat myself a little bit from my last answer in that my default position is that we need to preserve our natural areas. And, If you're going to build on asphalt or build on redoing a building. Now, the next job is try and knock me off that position if you think that's right, based upon looking at all the other components of the decision, the economic, the social, if any of our founding principles would feel like they're coming in conflict with that. How do we do that? Because that's tough then. How do you get all those relevant data points? And that goes back to our first position on what an action we can take on change and opportunity. And really what Kate and team are doing with the board in how do we formulate a very structured framework for the Environmental Advisory Committee, the Transportation Advisory Committee, the Pedestrian Bicycle Advisory Committee, and the DRB to get involved early in these information of what developments are going on, influence them, and then give the board a structured way to think about it and use all that important information so that we can make informed decisions as a community. And I think that's the best way to handle that.
Okay. Thank you, Andy. Mason?
You know, that land swap is a touchy, issue with a lot of people. I've got mixed feelings. One of my very good lifelong friends lives in the condominium closest to that stand of trees. And when I've talked to him about it, his reaction is maybe a little bit over the top. He says, good riddance. But it's not because he doesn't like those trees. Everybody loves Lake Ann. I miss the Lake Ann that was there when I was growing up. It was vibrant. You'd run into your neighbors all the time walking on the plaza. It was a center of activity. And over the years, a number of things have happened. It turned into a condominium, so it was harder to manage as a successful commercial enterprise. The density, they expected that a lot more people would be living around Reston, but as the population has aged, we've got 1 or 2 people living in homes that would, handle 3 or 4 people. The only thing that's going to bring back the Lake Ann that I think we all want to see is going to be more population. And given my choice between a shot in the arm for Lake Ann and what I think is a good-looking development plan, I mean, if you've seen the renderings, I don't find that offends my senses as far as what Lake Ann should be. If it came down to the stand of trees or Lake Ann, I'm going to take Lake Ann. I think the only falling apart on this whole thing, really, I don't fault the decision that the board made. I think it was probably the communication with the members that was really lacking there. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin?
Yeah, well, so to start with the tree canopy, we've got a goal of 45% tree canopy in Reston. Right now, we're at 38%, and that's likely to drop as some of these redevelopment proposals come through. If we're going to get to our goal with all the redevelopment that's coming, that's going to require a concerted effort between RA, the county, and the developers to make that happen, to preserve the mature trees that we have and restore in areas where we can't protect them. RA did push for and get language about preserving the mature tree canopy in the master plan revisions with RCA's strong support. And that's something that I would like to see enforced as these development proposals come through. Now, on the open space question, that was a big issue for us at RCA. When the master plan called for a goal of 20% open space in the development, we were calling for a minimum of 25% because we believe that open space is a central part of what makes Reston Reston. And it's not just the environmental values, it's also the viewscape. If you drive through the area along the Beltway where Tyson's Corner is, all the trees that were clear cut for the hot lanes, it's a lot uglier over there now because you don't have the trees screening the view of all the buildings along Tyson's Corner. So I think that the development review process that brings all the advisory committees in early in the process, we can't count on the county alone to preserve Reston's values. We've got to stand up for Reston's values, and that means we've got to be involved in the process and standing up for those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Rachel?
Thank you. I think the gist of the question was, how do we implement a process that will preserve our forests and our open spaces? And so I'd like to address that first. And I think it's been touched on already by the people up here on the table, and that is through partnerships. We have limited ability to protect those resources because a lot of the planning and zoning responsibilities fall with the county. Strong relationships with the county and the formation of private and public partnerships as development occurs will be one of the key ways we can achieve that process of preserving our open space and our forest canopy. Secondly, give you an opportunity to tell a little bit about my background. I've been involved in ecological and environmental science for 30 years. I'm currently the science advisor for the U.S. Geological Survey. As the science advisor for the Northeast region, where I manage a program of $160 million a year and 1,000 people, I get I have the choice of helping to determine what of our science directions are. I've tried to focus on urban ecology. My promise to you is that I will bring those skills that I have to the board and to you as a community to help make those decisions in balancing those three fundamental elements: our social, our economic, and our environmental values. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Jerry?
Let me talk about the land swap first. I have always supported Lake Ann redevelopment. I stood before the RA board with Bob Simon to talk about the importance of Lake Ann and why that redevelopment of Lake and revitalization of Lake Ann is important. I highly respect the expertise of people like Claudia Thompson-Deal and Kevin Monroe, who, for other reasons, thought the land swap wasn't good. I think I invoked the ire of the president of the Reston Association twice about my position. My position was, this is the first time that I ever remember the Reston Association giving away, swapping, or selling land to support a commercial venture. And once you start doing that, that's going to raise the concern a lot of Reston residents about what comes next. So we need to be very careful about how we do that. Secondly, there is this goal of 20% in our Reston master plan, but that's a goal. Your involvement is critical to make sure that we continue to enforce that goal. But third, talk about the DRB process. The DRB process is great, but do we have people like Rachel serving on the DRB who understand the importance of our natural areas and how to protect them? They don't. And we ought to make, the RA board approves the members of that DRB, and we ought to make sure that they have members who understand our natural environment so that they can make the right decisions for our
Jerry,
community.
your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, candidates. Our next question, we received two almost identical questions, so I'm going to combine them. They have to do with ethics. Concerns have arisen recently about potential conflict of interest on the board in considering important association issues. Would you support an RA board conflict of interest or code of ethics code, pardon the redundancy, which demands recusal on board votes for the same? And we're going to start with you, Jerry.
There's a conflict of interest statement which guides this board's actions in the Non-Stock Corporation Act that refers to the fact that when RA members have a conflict of interest, either a financial or other interest, in stepping forward with a vote on a particular issue, they got to recuse themselves. It's essentially up to the member, though, to decide whether or not he or she has a conflict of interest on a particular vote. We have, as board members, a expectation of loyalty and service to this board. And one of those expectations is that if you have a conflict of interest, you recuse yourself from that vote. I don't know anything about this issue, but we must live as board members by those rules to make sure that if we feel like we have a conflict of interest, that we recuse ourselves from voting on a particular issue. That doesn't mean we can't speak about this or that aspect of a particular item, but we have a responsibility as board members and as loyalty to the board to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Rachel?
I agree entirely that we need that ethics policy that all the board members would adhere to. As part of the federal government, when you join the federal government and at your certain level in the federal government, you have to make available to the federal government what your vested interests are. So that's one element that we could include in an ethics process so that it's transparent if any individual on the board has a conflict of interest, because that information would be part of the information that we would make available to the other members and to the board and to the community. But one of the issues here, and that has brought this up, is that there have been times, and I think of the lake and land swap in particular, there has been a lack of transparency. I think this ethical process and the development of a policy would help clear those kind of issues up and prevent them from happening in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Colin?
I agree. I think the importance of having an ethics policy that includes disclosure statements and encourages a spirit of transparency is very important. Jerry's correct that non-stock corporations are required. They do have conflict of interest rules by which RA must abide. But having a specific, a policy for RA that spells things out, I think is very important. As I said, in order to encourage the spirit of transparency that we want to see, and also as a perception issue, because I don't necessarily believe that there are any board members who are actively trying to manipulate the board for their own gain, but if you have an ethics policy in place, then you know that the highest standards are being followed, and that's the kind of thing that we want to see.
Thank you, Colin. Mason?
I'm going to revisit the last question very, very briefly, because if you go to reston.masonmiller.com, I've already written about this. But, you know, one thing we could do, if you are really concerned about Reston transferring title to property that it owns, you know, we could put a restrictive covenant on property that we own that says it can only be used for Reston's use. The way you would have to do that deed is you'd be giving the interest in neighboring
Mason,
properties.
I need you to address the question at hand.
Okay, I have no problem recusing myself where I have a conflict. I have no problem with the rule.
Thank you. Andy?
Hi, thanks. As board members, we do sign a conflict of interest policy when we join the board, so that's in place. Could a policy be written or enhanced specifically for Reston Association? You know, probably we could look into that. But there is something in place today that works on conflict of interest situations, and that a board member should recuse themselves if they feel there is a conflict of interest. So that is in place today. I guess I'd just like to say, what you have in me is no hidden agendas. What you see is what you get. I can guarantee that, you know, I will look at every policy, position, proposal thoughtfully to the best of my abilities, gather all the data points that I can for a given issue, and vote thoughtfully and to the best of my abilities. And thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty easy call. I think to the extent that we can strengthen any ethics or disclosure requirements for RA board members is terrific, because it should be a transparent process. You know, like Rachel, you know, I work for the federal government in positions of public trust. We have a lot of disclosures that we need to that we need to make. Yeah, and you know, I spent some time in the contracting community too, and you know, one of the things that we hold our contracting officers to in the government is a little bit higher standard, and it talks about not just actual conflicts of interest, but even the appearance of conflicts of interest. If I was a board member, that's the standard that I would hold myself to, the same that I do in my professional world, is if there was a conflict, or even if it could be perceived that there was a conflict, that I would recuse myself and act as any other Reston resident to express my views to the board.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike?
Frankly, I'm surprised nobody said they wouldn't support an ethics rule. Okay. The obvious answer is yes, I would support that. And like some of my colleagues here, I was a federal employee for about 29 years. I was a federal investigator for 21 years. I'm also used to a higher scrutiny of integrity and ethical conduct and behavior. I don't think that it should be an overbearing, draconian kind of code of ethics here, but I don't think there would be any harm in, again, showing transparency and just putting things up front that board members adhere and abide by certain rules.
Thank you, Mike. Lucinda?
Yeah, I agree, obviously, and would support a code of ethics. I also would go one step further and look at enforcement and maybe have an independent committee similar to the election committee to ensure that it's followed. I just want to tell you a little bit about me. My husband and I have both dedicated our lives to public service. I work for a nonprofit. He works for the fire department. I'm here for public service. I'm not here for personal gain. I'm not here for power or, publicity or fame or anything. I actually am not really excited about being a public figure. I'm more excited about solving the problems. So I just want to let you know that.
Thank you. Okay, I got off on my reversing, didn't I? I apologize for that. Okay. The last audience question has to do with something I think is on all of our minds at this particular time, traffic. So the questioner asks, what do you see as the impact of the new plan on traffic in Reston, and what can RA do to minimize the negative impact?
Traffic is one of my favorite subjects.
Not one of mine.
I know. I ride public transportation, I walk and ride my bike, and I also drive my car. And my job basically is to help communities improve their transportation. I know about land use and we're making grids as opposed to corridors. I study how to improve public transportation, how to get people onto public transportation, how to improve pathways and bikeways. One of the easy things that we can do that won't affect the budget very much is put up wayfinding signs on the pathways that people biking and walking can use to navigate to the new Silver Line Metro station. I have a lot of really good ideas about how to improve and encourage people to use alternative to cars. And I'm not trying to take your car away. You can still have the car, but there's a variety of transportation options that we can all use.
Thank you. Mike.
Well, again, this is going to come down to a money issue to really solve it. But to minimize the impact without all that money, it's going to take some creative solutions. And one of those things is going to be working with state, VDOT, and the county to try to secure funds for additional road improvements, as well as the developers, make sure they kick in a fair share to make that happen. So how does that going to affect you? It's going to affect all of us. I mean, to say it's going to be minimized is going to be probably dreaming at this point, because there's going to be some growing pains. We're going to need at least one additional access road across the Dulles Toll Road. Somebody's got to have to come up with the money for that. How do we do it? So we're going to have to be strong advocates to make that happen. Like Lucinda said, we're encourage the use of alternate transportation to get to Metro. Maybe take circuitous routes across the toll road instead of adding to the wheelie log jam that's going to be anticipated. So the other thing is to make sure we communicate to the citizens on when things are going to happen and give them suggestions on how they can avoid or minimize the impact on their lives.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff.
I've spent a long time in the transportation community. I worked for the U.S. Department of Transportation for about 25 years, so I know a couple things about transportation. And I had talked earlier about things that we collaborate with our partners, the county and the state and those folks, and then things if we don't collaborate, things that are done to us. This transportation issue that's going to be coming before us is something that's being done to us. There's not really going to be all that much that we can do to change the boundaries of the impact that it's going to come to Reston. What we can do, though, as a community now, in the context of the master planning process and the implementation, is seek those partnerships with the state and the partnerships with Fairfax County. And this partnership with Fairfax County, we need to be a more forceful partner than we have been before so that things aren't done to us again. Because this transportation issue is going to be very difficult. It's going to impact everybody. Some of the things that we can do to mitigate, though, are look at multimodal opportunities. We also need to be thinking, and I'm sure we have some great volunteers on our transportation committee, but look at safety. Because as we have more people riding bikes and walking to get from here to there, we need to be thinking about safety so that our kids that are riding their bikes with all this extra traffic can do so safely, so that our jogging community can be out there and enjoying the outdoors safely. But this impact of traffic is just going to be tremendous. It's going to require forceful partnership from RA dealing with the county.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy?
From my work on this topic over the last couple of years with the board and on the task force when I took over from Paul Thomas, two areas stand out to me. One, it was been discussed, is the multimodal transport. We need to work and continue to work to connect our pathways to sidewalks, how to bike lanes get on there, so that with the goal of that every Reston resident has an usable method to get to the metro areas without getting in their cars. Is that buses? Is that walking? Is that bikes? That's got to be our goal. Will it be ubiquitous? So we all, sometimes we're going to drive to the trains, sure. But does every Reston resident have a method, a usable method to do that? And that has to be our goal. The second thing is implementation. There's a lot of really important and good plans in that Reston Master Plan of how we make how do we mitigate traffic effects, extra crossings over the toll roads, underpasses, overpasses, and it really comes down to implementation. How do we influence the implementation with VDOT, with the developers, with the county? How do we influence it so that the implementation, when new development is coming, more people are coming, more jobs are coming, and those infrastructure pieces are coming in just in time or just before time, not just too late. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Mason?
Well, I think the solutions that RA can actually implement itself have all been discussed here. Multimodal transportation. Let's make it as clear and easy as we can to let people know how they can get there without taking their car across these scarce crossings we've got now in Reston. I would want to see Reston lobby developers to proffer getting these crossings built as quickly as possible. Obviously that's beyond our budgetary control here in Reston. I don't think of Metro as having happened to us. I really do think that the Metro coming here it makes Reston a better place. It's just how are we going to work around it to go ahead and keep Reston one community. It's funny, as we're having this discussion, just for the record, I'd rather spend $105 million on that crossing for Soapstone than I would on an indoor pool. Again, those aren't decisions we're going to get to make on the RA board, but those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mason. Colin?
Well, I think a lot of the important things have already been said, and it comes down to, most importantly, what Mike said, money. If we're going to make the kind of investments that we need, the crossings, the grid of streets around the metro stations, it's going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to need to get that money from a variety of sources. We're going to need to get it from the county. We're going to need to get it from developers. We're going to need to get some of that state transportation funding for that. And we should absolutely be lobbying for that. As part of the passage of the master plan, the County Board of Supervisors called for an inclusive process to look at the transportation funding issue. And I think RA needs to be a leader at that process to make sure that we're getting the funding that we need and it's not all falling on our shoulders. But the other important thing that we need to consider is that for the next 5 years, when Wheelie opens, it's going to, I promise, that's going to be the end of the line. And I was on a group, the Reston Metro Rail Access Group, that looked at trying to alleviate the congestion around the Wheelie station when it opened. We made $100 million worth of recommendations. Only about $5 million of that has been funded, unfortunately. So the station, it's coming. We've got several years. We're not going to be able to build another crossing over the Dulles Toll Road in the next 5 years. So we're going to have to focus on multimodal stuff, fixing the broken links in our transportation system to make sure people can walk, bike, or take buses to the stations and around the community. And wayfinding to make sure that people know where the paths are, what's the most efficient way to get there. So those are the things that we need to focus on.
Thank you, Colin. Rachel?
I do believe that the most, probably the most severe and most noticeable impact that change and growth is going to have on the Reston community will first be seen in transportation. We have to, there's several steps that we need to take. One is obviously because of the cost involved and because of that there are many entities involved, it's going to be done through partnership. One thing I will do on the RA board, I will encourage other RA board members to do, are to be advocates with those entities to make sure that our voice is heard to help minimize the impacts of traffic in our community. There's a wonderful document. One of our best functioning, I believe, committees is the Pedestrian and Bike Committee, and they've developed a report with a number of excellent examples and recommendations for next steps to improve multimodal transportation. A couple of other points. Interestingly enough, VDOT does not include pervious sidewalks. That is, sidewalks that allow water to drain into the soil as part of their standards. They only allow impervious sidewalks at this present point. I think we need to work with VDOT, offer ourselves as an experimental community where we can have those pervious sidewalks, where we can not only address transportation, but we can reduce the environmental impacts of adding that new sidewalk infrastructure, sidewalk and other transportation infrastructure into our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Jerry?
A lot of people say, well, the Soapstone Crossing, I mean, that was recommended by the RMAG only 5 years ago.
I think I said that.
But it wasn't just 5 years ago. First time we talked about it was during the Wheelie charrette that we had 11 years ago when we recommended that. Funding is very important, but in order to make that funding happen, we all have to be involved in that process to push to make sure that the infrastructure that has been put in that master plan gets done. We all need to stay involved. We've got 23,000 members. We need to mobilize that voice in order to make sure that we educate them about what's going on and how to influence the funding process. Secondly, we've all known that our success of Metro Rail is going to be how we get from our homes to the station and from our homes and businesses back to the station. So we all need to, as Rachel said, we all need to pick this up and read it to see if you want to bike or walk to the station, how you might be able to do that, although there's a lot more in here that we haven't gotten done yet. So we need to make sure that, in fact, our current system gets people to and from their neighborhoods and to and from the station. So we need to make sure that that happens. And finally, we need, like I said, to keep ourselves involved in this process. RA doesn't have the money for the funding. RCC doesn't have the money
Jerry,
for the funding,
but
but developers do, and we need to make sure that they support funding for transportation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your questions in cyberspace. Thank you for your questions. We had outstanding questions, and I'm only sorry that we couldn't address them all, but I did best I could to give a fair representation. So we're coming to the last segment of the forum now, which is the candidates' closing remarks. Each of the candidates will have 1 minute to make their closing remarks, and if there's no objection, since I messed up the order before, I'm going to revert to the original order for the closing remarks, starting with Lucinda.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Reston has an opportunity to be a national leader in livable communities. We're the 7th largest community association in the nation, and we're the 1st largest in the state of Virginia. We need to be leaders. I have the vision and skills to promote long-term planning and land use policies to preserve and enhance our founding principles and the characters that make Reston a desirable community. More importantly, I'm fair, honest, and a long-term big picture thinker. As demonstrated by my collaboration with Rachel Muir and Colin Mills, I'm thoughtful, strategic, and I make extra effort to work with others. I'm a team player. By voting for Colin, Rachel, and me, you will have a team working for you to keep Reston great and make it even greater.
Thank you. Mike?
So now you have to decide who to vote for. You may like something about everyone or something about me, something about the other people here, but you got to make a decision. Well, maybe this will help. I was recently elected as vice president of the Reston Runners Running Club. It's a large club with over 1,100 members. So why would they elect me to such an important position in the club? Well, it's because they trust that I will do the right thing when it comes to promoting and moving the club forward. I wanted to run for the Reston Runners Board, but I had many people encouraging me because they had a belief in me and my judgment. Then the Reston Association election came along. While I was certainly interested in the goings-on with the Metro and Reston's growth, I wasn't considering a run for one of the director positions. I was asked to run by my friends at Reston Runners to enter the election because they think I can make a difference, and they trust me to do the right thing, so I accepted the challenge. I'm humbled that they have that kind of faith in me, and I certainly don't want to let them down. If I'm elected, I won't let you down.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff?
You know, over the past 43 years, I've had the privilege to experience Reston across all the phases of my life, as a child, a parent, and now as a graying old Restonian. Along the way, I've gained a deep and lasting appreciation for all the things that make Reston unique. Its residents, its values, its facilities. Let me tell you the things that are going to be important to me as if you elect me to the Reston Board of Association. I'm going to work to preserve our natural resources and open spaces. I'm going to work on sustaining and enriching our recreational programming and facilities in a way that's thoughtful and respectful of our local neighbors. I'm going to foster effective communication. That means two-way communication, being sure that we engage the community in two-way conversations, not just pushing out information, but really getting an understanding of what's important to Reston. I'm also going to promote good governance and sound fiscal management. We need to be sure that we're using the resources that are afforded to RA in a sound, responsible way. And also going to engage Reston residents in the process. They need to be informed about what's going on and what's important and how they can make a difference in our community. Most important, be sure that you get out and vote for somebody. Hopefully you'll vote for me, but vote for somebody.
Thank you, Jeff. Andy?
Thank you. It has been an honor to serve on the RA board. I have listened to you, RA staff, and our advisory committees, gathered information, and have asked the questions that have driven investigation and change. I have voted thoughtfully. I championed the effort to get lighting at Browns Chapel Little League Field. I led the update of our budgeting processes so that we are now more carefully planning for the future, setting a structure that will supply this and future boards with the framework necessary to keep our infrastructure in good shape while keeping our assessment levels at reasonable rates. Going forward, as development proposals increase, we need to better prioritize our needs for updated amenities. We need to work with developers, the county, guiding them towards helping to provide those priorities, and then judge proposals against our founding principles. I firmly believe, and my experience confirms, that the best communities are the ones where the members get involved. This is what makes our community so special. There is more to do, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Mason?
Well, you've got a lot of good choices up here for the at-large seat for 3 years. I'm certainly here to ask that you vote for me. My life experience, I think, lends itself to this job. Growing up, my father did a lot of land use law. He was also on the Board of Supervisors. It was dinner conversation. And I think that as we are entering into this complex phase of Reston's evolution, that in addition to my honesty and telling people what I think that I have a lot of skills that would really lend themselves to making the best decisions for Reston. Been here since 1971. I'm not going anywhere. I want to make sure that we have one Reston, and it's the great Reston that we have right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. Colin?
Well, thank you to RA and the Elections Committee for putting together this forum, and thanks to everybody who showed up here or is watching online. We've got a great many challenges ahead of us as we move into the transit-oriented future. We need to ensure that we hold true to Bob Simon's vision and maintain the elements of the community that make us special, our open spaces, our commitment to diversity, our engaged residents, while continuing to grow and thrive and take advantage of the investment in the Silver Line. These are exactly the issues I've been tackling with RCA for the last 8 years. I hope to continue that involvement on the RA board. I'm a proven leader and a consensus builder, and I'm well attuned to the issues that interest and concern Restonians. I ask for your vote for the RA board, and I hope you'll support my friends Rachel Muir and Lucinda Shannon, who share my interests and goals for Reston and for RA. But most importantly, whoever you support, please vote. Everybody here up at this table is a good person who cares about the community. And our community works when our residents get involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Rachel?
Thank you, Colin, for your remarks. My observation that the qualities that make a good board member are, one, leadership, and secondly, experience and expertise. Leadership involves a number of qualities. I think it involves the ability to listen carefully. I think that is my most important and skill as a politician, which I'm not. I'm a technical person. But I think the expertise that I possess right now is the expertise that is needed in Reston in this critical time as we move through a new period of growth. I'm a national expert in regards to natural resource management. I have focused in recent years on urban ecology. I have seen much larger and many communities throughout the country dedicate their resources to doing what we're trying to do now, and they have done so successfully. We can do the same. I look forward to the opportunity to serve all this community as a resource and an opportunity to show that service to this community is my principal responsibility.
Rachel, I'm sorry, your time is up.
Thank you.
More than a decade of service to this community marked by achievement and success, but more importantly, in the arena, fighting for this community's values. As RA's past CEO, gaining community support to build Nature House in the Southgate Community Center, building budgets that kept assessments low and balanced fiscal responsibility and member needs, having the vision to lay the plan that's resulted in, to date, $40 million of work restoring Reston's natural areas. As a leader of arts in the task force fighting to ensure the future residents and development will be members of RA and contribute to Reston's future needs for infrastructure, public facilities, open space, and maintenance of natural areas. Joining with RA and RCA in a strong single voice to keep Reston National Golf Course open space, to educate our members in one of the most successful community forums in years about how the new comp plan will impact our community. If that's the kind of record of proven community leadership you wish to see again, I ask you to vote Valois for RA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to all of our candidates. That concludes our forum. Thank you all for coming this morning. And as I mentioned earlier, there are stations set up in the back of the room. If you have not already voted and would like to do so right now, you may. RA staff is on hand to assist you if you need assistance. Election ballots, as a reminder, are due back by Monday, March 31st at 5 p.m. And again, you can vote either by mail or by internet. Replacement ballots, if you need one, can be obtained by calling RA at 703-435-6530 or sending an email to electionscommittee@reston.org. Thank you, candidates. Thank you, audience.
If you have additional questions, I'll be glad to stay here for a period of time to address those. Well done.
Yep, exactly the same thing.
Happy campaigning.
You did great.